Cave Hill. On behalf of my colleagues, the psychology team in the School of Education, we want to say a big thank you to you for coming to join us at this webinar, which was actually prompted by the sudden change that we all have to make in the face of coronavirus outbreak, from the face-to-face, teaching to teaching. And it is expected that at the end of today's webinar, you would have gained an insight into the psychological principles that you can utilize to encourage the students, the children, to learn online, to motivate them, to make them active, and not just sitting down like spectators in the classroom, in the online world. We also want them to be very active. And also, we will expect that you will be favorably disposed to online teaching. It's something that we have to marry right now because we don't know when the coronavirus is going to leave us. So without wasting much time, I want to hand over to our moderator for today's webinar, who is Dr. Bradshaw. Dr. Ramona Acha Bradshaw is currently the acting deputy principal at the Edison Teachers Training College. She holds a PhD in education from the University of the West Indies, a postgraduate diploma in public sector management, and graduated as a valedictorian of her year with a postgraduate diploma in education. Dr. Bradshaw has 20 years of teaching experience and is passionate about equipping teachers with the tools that are necessary to prepare students to navigate their way successfully in the 21st century that we are. Her research and publications are in the area of teacher quality and scientific literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our moderator for today's webinar, Dr. Ramona Acha Bradshaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fayambo. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As was so eloquently shared by Dr. Fayambo, I am Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw, and I will be the moderator for this session. Today, at my alma mater, we are presenting Promoting Education in an Online World, Psychological Insights for the Future, presented by a panel of psychologists from the School of Education here at the UWI. Just a few little housekeeping matters before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I will bring them up at the end of the presentations. We will also have time for you to ask questions at the end. Now, without further ado, we will introduce our first presenter. Dr. Grace Fayambo is a lecturer in developmental psychology at the School of Education, UWI, Cave Hill. She holds a PhD in counseling and developmental psychology. She has 10 years teaching experience as a secondary school teacher in Nigeria and was a lecturer at the Department of Educational Foundations and Counseling, Olabisi Onabanjo University, before joining the UWI in 2008. Dr. Fayambo's research centers on promoting student engagement and learning outcomes, technology-infused learner-centered strategies, emotional intelligence, resilience, and academic achievement. She is well published and is a 2013 recipient of the UWI Principals Award for Excellence in Outstanding Teaching at the UWI Cave Hill. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Fayambo.
Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm here this afternoon to share with you my presentation entitled Examining Psychological Developmental Principles in supporting online education for children? Well, as we all know, for this seminar, we want to share the developmental approach to teaching and engaging children online, the psychological principles guiding what children should learn, and how best children can learn, and of course, when they are supposed to learn, from the perspectives of three developmental theorists, Piaget, Bandura, and Vygotsky. And we can see from the what is happening around us that the environment is changing and reshaping rapidly due to the novel COVID-19 pandemic, impacting the way we live, think, and learn. Consequently, our educational systems are facing significant pressure to change from rigid face-to-face to the much more rewarding and modifying modern online student-centered mode for learning effectively in global digital age of 21st century. Teaching, as we can see, teaching online requires shifting from thinking of having students physically around us, as captive audience, to trying to teach students who are now scattered in time and place and distractions, and yet we still want to engage them. We want to give them the quality of education. So we will be looking at the psychological principles from Piaget's stages of development, and then Bandura's observational learning, and as well as Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. We will briefly look at these theories one by one. What is about Piaget? What is his concern about teaching the children online? He's mainly interested in the biological influences of how we come to know. He developed an interest in the intellectual development of children as they pass through the different stages, the sensory, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and formal operation. His main concern is that we should actually know the developmental stage that the child is, in order to know what we are going to expect from the child, in terms of, intellectual capability. And of course, for we teachers, we will also depend on this to actually know the instruction that we're going to pass. I have a number of videos there, but I'm just going to share like two to actually see how Piaget, came up with his theory, and how we can also assess our the children, whether in the school or in the.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to see how the concrete operational child reacted to this same experiment.
So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just here, but they have had the same amount of juice in it.
So we can see the differences in the stages of development, and this should shape the way we teach the children. And we may also have variations even within the same age group. So when do we want to teach? At what age are we looking at, comparing numbers, for instance, greater than, and as well as less than? How do we want to teach it? We can borrow from Bandura's, 3 models of, learning, live models. As teachers, as parents, parents, especially at home now that the children are learning from home, we can provide the live models for these children concerning comparing of, numbers. We can even cut some cardboards for them, to practice with, and this can really help them to learn, greater than and less than. And we can also use symbolic model for them. Symbolic model has to do with, like, the fictional characters or real people, performing some actions in the videos, that's like the one we just saw. And then the games, there can also be, this can reinforce the behaviors of learning. If you want to teach this same concept to a child at for 7 or 8 years old, then we can also get them moving online. They don't have to sit down and just be like spectators on the field. They can be very active. The way we present the materials to them, so we can make use of some concrete activities, like the teacher can tell them to stand with arms akimbo, and when they look to the right, they are seeing the sign greater than, because these are concrete operational children, and they can also look to the left and see the sign that is less than. Definitely, if we tell a pre-operational child all this, it may be too much for them to know. But now that we are at this stage, we can make use of this, style or strategy. And we are also talking about Bandura's live model. So parents can provide this live model for the children at home to learn this concept. And gradually, we will be moving on to our dear adolescents, at former operational stage. We can use gallery work for them, to solve maths, especially like quadratic equation. They can use like 4 approaches online. We can put them in breakout rooms, and the first group will use the first approach, and then second, and they will come back to the main room and share their ideas. It is very, very possible to be very active online. It's not a passive way of learning at all. We can assign them into different groups, and it's very flexible. It takes the children out of their chairs, even at home. So parents, we need your help in this regard as well. So for the Vygotsky's theory is talking about scaffolding. When you scaffold the child, you are guiding the child to reach the zone of proximal development, which is the actual point. That is what the child can do with the help of the more knowledgeable other, who can be the peers, as we said. So we should encourage even collaborative assignments. We can put them in the group and they do the projects. They will meet online and they come and present the project in the class. And we can also reward them. We can reinforce them positively so that they continue to, to act in these, desirable ways. So teachers, it's very possible for us to be able to, encourage our learners to learn effectively and online. Finally, in conclusion, teachers and parents can make learning online interactive, engaging, and effective by providing necessary assistance for the children and ensuring that they are exposed to developmentally appropriate topics. Children should also be supported socially and emotionally through active learning strategies, collaborative group work, assignments to expand their schemas, assimilate and accommodate new concepts, and adapt to them as they continue learning. Thank you very much for listening. We will attend to your questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Fayambo. That was a very interesting presentation. It is true that an understanding of the psychological underpinnings of learning can help us as teachers to better tailor our strategies to facilitate more effective learning online. And the concrete examples that you gave were very useful. At this time, I will introduce our next speaker. Dr. Jason Marshall has recently come on board as a lecturer in educational psychology in the School of Education, but has been an adjunct faculty member for the past 10 years. He holds a PhD in education with specialization in educational psychology. He is an experienced educator, trainer, and research consultant, and has worked for the UWI Open Campus on their educational leadership doctoral program, and as such, has vast experience of teaching online. He is an active researcher with special interests in psychosocial factors that affect teaching and learning, technology infusion in education, autonomy, and self-directed learning within modern day classroom environments. Please welcome Dr. Jason Marshall.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arthur Bradshaw, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here. I hope as you spoke, some people got a chance to look at the question on the screen. What would the world be like if we were all the same? And I want you to think about that for a minute, or probably perhaps less, probably 30 seconds or so. What would the world be like if we were all the same? And I have one word that I could use to describe what the world would be like. Boring. The reality is that we have different personalities, we have different experiences, and we come from different backgrounds. And that diversity is what makes the world unique and how we engage in education in particular. The point is that in education, difference matters. It's important to understand student differences. It's important to take into consideration that not every student operates in the same manner. And especially in light of COVID-19, it's important, even more so now than ever, that we take into consideration how the world has changed and how students have changed in terms of how they learn. Hence, the purpose of my session is basically to explore the psychology behind learning styles. And I want to look at how we can cater to student learning differences in online teaching. Now, I want to take you on a journey with me, right? And by the end of this journey, I'm hoping that you'll be more aware of the important psychological concepts associated with catering to diverse learning styles in a virtual classroom. And I want to walk away with some practical tips on how to cater to different learning styles when delivering instruction in the virtual classroom. But first, I want to address the elephant in the room, right? Do learning styles exist or don't they? Big question, isn't it? And the reality is, if you do a basic Google search, you would find a lot of literature suggesting that learning styles don't exist. But regardless of where you stand, it's important to know that difference matters. If you call it learning styles, if you call it student differences, the point is that we have students coming into classroom who all are different. And I remember doing my master's and the professor said, he doesn't teach a class, he teaches a group of individuals. And that's instructive to the extent that we think about what a classroom is. It's not just a group of students, but it's a group of individuals. In other words, everyone brings to the classroom a different learning experience, a different learning preference, and a different way of intaking the information. So in education, there cannot be a one size fits all, especially in online education. Now, with the advent of COVID, it seems as though we were all thrust into this modality. We were expected to go online, and students will be successful just by transitioning to online teaching or online learning. And as you can see depicted here in the image, but the reality is it does not work like that. There's a lot of work that has to go into actually preparing for online teaching and learning. I will explore some of that as we go on. The other thing, and very importantly, we must not assume that students know how to learn in an online environment. In fact, we shouldn't even assume that students know how to learn. But with technology, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Snapback, I think, Snapchat, sorry. we tend to assume that because students are digital natives, that they will naturally progress into an online learning environment. And the reality is that is not always the case, especially when it comes to having issues like equity and so on. And some students don't have access to tablets, they don't have access to computers and so on and so forth. So not everybody is intuitively engaged in an online environment. So we as educators have to actually do something to make that learning interesting rather. And one of those things is to cater to different learning styles. The other, and this point here is instructive as well. How students learn should determine the way you teach, not the other way around. I'm going to read that again. How students learn should determine the way you teach, not the other way around. And this is important because ultimately the way we learn is the way we teach. But the reality is, it's not everybody learns like us. And we go back to that first slide, or second slide rather, where we spoke about student differences matter. And if we're talking about student differences, especially in an online environment, it's important that we adapt, innovate, and teach in a dynamic way that allows students to be brought into the learning space. You could be there physically, but you might not be there mentally. How do we get the students there mentally? By diversifying our teaching. And this is important in terms, people talk about learning styles, but learning styles is just a part of the picture. It is the intervening variables and the interconnected variables that are important, because if we cater to different learning styles or student learning differences, look at what results: student motivation, student engagement, student autonomy, providing an enriching learning experience for students as well. And we're improving their academic achievement. And when I'm talking about academic achievement, I'm not necessarily saying that a student should get an A or B or excel with a good grade, but their understanding of the content. That's the most important thing. Grades do not define a student, right? But how they're able to interact with the material and how they're able to transfer their learning. Now, as educators, there are three things that we engage in. We engage in design, delivery, and assessment, right? So what I'm going to explore now are some practical tips in terms of how you could go about catering to different learning styles in an online environment. Bear in mind, there are a variety of learning style models. Most persons tend to make reference to VARK, but there's also the models by Dunn and Dunn. You have Felder and Silverman. You have Smet et al. There are so many different ones, but people tend to emphasize VARK, which is not the only learning style model. And learning style models are actually vast in what they cover. But in terms of course design, right? Text by itself, black and white, is bland. You need to incorporate some audio and visuals in your material, make the material more appealing and memorable. Color is always useful in terms of enhancing the material. Now, if you look at the information that the government continues to share with regard to COVID-19, they use infographics, right? And for me, that information is a lot easier to digest as opposed to a whole lot of black and white. So what I'm saying to you is that we need to diversify our teaching and we need to catch up with times, because in reality, I think the world is moving ahead in terms of technology, and education cannot afford to be left behind. So we need to strategize in that area. If you look at this image, the image is quite comical. I tend to think that sometimes when we transition to an online environment, we adopt the same approach as a face-to-face class, and that cannot be the modus operandi. We should be able to allow the technology to work for us, right? Firstly, it's important that you record your sessions. And what does recording do? First of all, if a student can listen to recording, guess what he can do or she can do? They can pause, they can rewind, they can fast forward. So they get to learn at their own pace. My colleague before mentioned using breakout groups. There are various online platforms, Zoom, for example, you have Blackboard, Collaborate, and various learning management systems that allow for engagement in the online, active engagement in the online classroom. Use polling, ask students how they feel, add short, interesting, and relevant videos. Emphasis being on short, because student attention span, even adult attention span, is relatively short as well. Build on students' existing knowledge. So even in an online environment, it's important to understand what students already know and use that information to connect with them. Remember, you're not face-to-face with the student, so your experience and your interaction with the student needs to be humanized. You need to be relatable. You need to make students comfortable, right? And build on their existing knowledge as well. In terms of course assessment, it's also important to diversify the assessment. I think we as educators sometimes tend to focus on just the writing skills, but the reality is that students have strengths in different areas. A student may not be gifted in writing, but he or she could present, do a good presentation, or he or she could sing or dance or whatever. So in an online environment, we need to allow students opportunities to to share or submit their assignments or complete assignments in different formats. So that allows them to feel comfortable. And if you look at the field of positive psychology, two guys come to mind, Martin Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi, who speak about the whole idea of allowing people to work with their strengths. And when you work with your strengths, you feel a lot more comfortable and confident. So when you cater to different learning styles or learning differences, whatever you want to call it, you are enabling students to enjoy the learning experience, which is the most important thing, the enjoyment associated with learning. If you take that away at all, students will always be uninterested and bored, right? And the other thing too is that students don't always want to hear your voice. They want to hear from their peers. So you don't, as I say, you don't have to be sage on the stage either, right? Students like to engage with each other. My colleague spoke about this earlier, and I'm coming to an end right now. In terms of using developmentally appropriate strategies, I can remember watching Sesame Street a couple decades ago, and I remember a lot of things that they taught us about counting and word spelling words and so on. That's because the strategies that they used were developmentally appropriate. Now we have teachers who are at primary level, secondary level, and perhaps tertiary level. So we need to find appropriate ways to deliver instruction online that is suitable for the age that we're teaching as well. And the last thing I have to say, ask students how they want you to teach. That may sound counterintuitive, but we don't know it all. We don't know how a student feels and so on unless we ask him or her. We don't know how engaged the student is with the material unless we engage with him or her. In other words, this could be formal or this could be informal. Students could speak to you about their learning styles informally, or you can do a formal assessment at the beginning of the semester or the term and ask them, well, okay, complete this brief survey and let me get a sense of what your learning styles are. And then you deliver your instruction and design your course in accordance with that as well. So I hope you walked away. We're heading home now. So I hope you're more aware of some of the important psychological principles associated with catering to different learning styles and on some practical tips on how to cater to different learning styles when delivering online instruction. I thank you for your time and thank you for your patience, and I look forward to your questions as we continue. Over to you, Dr. Bradshaw, Archie Bradshaw.
Thank you. And thank you for taking us on this journey as it relates to catering to various learning styles. As teachers, we know it serves us better when we fulfill the role of guide by the side and not the sage on the stage. And each student really matters, and it's important to make learning fun. Thank you for reminding us of that. Now, participants, the last two presentations dealt with enriching student learning experiences online. The next two presentations will focus on fostering student motivation online. The first speaker under this theme will be Dr. Maya Jules, who will speak about engaging online peers in the learning process. Dr. Maya Amor Jules is a registered clinical psychologist and lecturer in experimental and physiological psychology in the School of Education for the past 6 years. She was a Commonwealth Split Site Scholar at the University of Nottingham and the UWI, holding a PhD in education with specialization in educational psychology. Dr. Jules conducts research in education and psychology and is well published in international peer-reviewed journals. She is a recipient of a number of awards, including the UWI Faculty of Humanities and Education Most Outstanding Researcher Award. She is also a past member of the executive of the Barbados Society of Psychology. Dr. Jules, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ramona. And it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. My presentation is entitled Engaging Online Peers in the Learning Process. So let's get this started. I want you to meet Robert. Robert is a secondary school teacher and he has 30 students to teach. Each week, he emailed his students his study questions before class. And in the online class, he always kept his video camera off and disabled the ability for students to chat and interact. As a student, he hated group work, so he set individual homework assignments. And he noted that after 3 weeks, attendance started to drop and students rarely completed the homework that he set. And what does Robert think? Well, I tried this online thing. But what I want to highlight is that what is very important is to understand the population under investigation. And I would say that this presentation more caters towards individuals within the adolescence period, slightly before and slightly after. You can go from maybe 11 years old right up to 18. This information should be relevant there. So understanding the population of investigation. The peer group is a key agent of socialization at this developmental period. Given through the actions of peers, they're able to provide information about what behaviors are accepted and valued and admired in multiple social contexts versus online, as well as offline. So the question is, how can we as teachers leverage the influence of the online peer group within a virtual education setting? And this is important to note because we always try to diversify, switch things up a bit. As Jason mentioned, we try to keep things interesting. So in this presentation, I'm just going to highlight some of the theories that are going to inform some of the principles that I will be talking about. Some may be new, some may not be new. But the last one here, the susceptibility to online peer influence model, came out of my doctoral research. And it demonstrated that many of the key principles that come from those classic theories are very relevant in today's online environment as well. So I'd like to share with you. The first thing, Bandura talks about reciprocal determinism. What's that? That's saying that we have to consider the personal characteristics, the intrinsic characteristics of our students, in addition to the environmental characteristics. And it is understanding these two components together which would allow us to inform their behavior, influence their behavior, shape their behavior. So I'm going to get the ball rolling with the personal characteristics. First thing, these individuals are looking for guidance because, as we know, Erikson talks about this stage of identity versus role confusion. So how do we translate this into the teaching and learning environment? Peer feedback. Students participate in peer relationships, they experiment, and as a result, we should also allow them to use this natural tendency to want to interact and get feedback from the peers in our sessions. The feedback should not only come from us. So think twice, as Robert did. He should have thought twice about disabling the student chat room and consider how to incorporate it into the lesson. The second characteristic is this need to belong. And we have to create a sense of community within our online environment, because young people in virtual spaces need to interact and satisfy this innate need for interconnectedness. Maslow talks about this, whereby without this need of belongingness, these love and belongingness needs, it will undermine confidence, will undermine their self-efficacy, and in this case, their academic self-efficacy. So we have to create that sense of community. So don't overstructure the sessions and pack it with a lot of content with no space for informal bond building amongst the students. Third bit, the need for popularity, status, and approval. And this definitely came out of the research that I mentioned earlier with the SOPI, the Susceptibility to Online Peer Influence Model, especially within the online environment. There are plenty of opportunities for comparison and for trying to get more likes or more hearts or coming up with the newest video that will be trending. So this is the environment within which our students are operating, these younger individuals. So what do we need to learn from this? That we can, based on this need for approval from others and this need for status, we in our classrooms can foster healthy competition among peers. Group membership fosters this. And as a result, students, it should be noted, emulate those individuals that they perceive as having higher status or admiration. How do we leverage this? Have students review and comment on each other's work. Have them sit in the driver's seat and be able to tell what their friend did or didn't do correctly. Sometimes it's easier hearing it from a friend than from an authority figure that you really don't have that interpersonal relationship with, as well as celebrate student online accomplishments. Now that may seem a little difficult to do apart from the putting on the virtual stars or an emoji or a thumbs up, but we can think even further outside of the box. These sessions need not necessarily have to happen within your classroom alone, these interactions for healthy competition. You can have colleagues at other schools, say for instance in science, say for instance in English, and you're teaching online. You may very well put forward an assignment, a group assignment, where students come up with content, small videos, jingles, and so on. And with parental permission, of course, post these videos on the school website. Furthermore, you might even be able to work with colleagues at other schools to create inter-school competitions where content is concerned, whereby you can create within an educational environment celebrity-like status among individuals who are able to comprehend the information well and be able to translate it in a way for other peers who may not get it right away to assimilate it. So those are just some ideas. The last one, and Grace would have mentioned the capacity to assimilate vicariously, Bandura again. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we assimilate more readily when we are receiving information from individuals that we can relate to. Okay, so these are known as models. They will be attended to if the model is perceived as being similar. Again, supporting the importance of having peers on the front lines when we are working in an online environment. So again, switch it up. Have students share the responsibility of being the host of sessions and share in the instruction to their peers. So what I'm going to touch on now are those environmental characteristics that the concept of reciprocal determinism alluded to at the very beginning. So I have Microsoft Teams, the G Suite platform, and Zoom, and there are a plethora of others. But what is common among many of these e-learning platforms is that there are multiple modes by which to communicate. You have polling. I wouldn't repeat some of the things that my colleagues would have mentioned, but multiple modes to communicate. They're relatively easy to use. Once you get the hang of it, they're pretty intuitive afterwards. Students can be constantly updated about posts. And this is very important because research has found that, and we could relate to it as well, the more that we are accessing information of a particular type, the more likely we are going to find that this information becomes readily available to access. So some people may mention priming, some people may mention that you're conditioned to think a particular way, but regardless, the amount of information that is sent consistently, you're more likely to remember that information. And many of these platforms allow for the instant feedback from what your students are doing online. Then the non-anonymous support, and it also supports existing social relationships. What do I mean by that is that once you are registered within the e-learning platform, everyone knows each other based on the name. So if it's supporting pre-existing social relationships, you can capitalize on that. Last bit, reinforcement and feedback, updates to posts, sharing of information, and the use of emojis could help as well. So this is Robert. This is what he actually looks like. But I'm going to now recap by looking at what Robert could have done differently or what Robert would have or should have obtained from this session. The first thing, when peers construct knowledge together, they acquire critical thinking skills. Discussion is important. It's one of the ways in which you're able to understand whether or not they truly comprehend what it is that you would have taught. If you can teach it, if you can convey it, it means that you have understood elements of it. And if they haven't, you can then do corrective action where necessary. Asking questions, and lastly, reviewing each other's work. Have students do that. 2, bear in mind that you're not to assume that students will naturally populate the peer learning systems in their classrooms. Jason mentioned that don't assume that students know how to learn within an online environment. And this is especially important because you have to set up the rules of engagement. You're not going to tell them what to say and how to say it and so on. That'll take away the creativity aspect. However, there's still some parameters that are needed. Remember, they need guidance. They're still searching for themselves and they're searching for guidance in the environment around them. How to pair up, how to respond to peers via the online platform. What's appropriate response? What's an inappropriate response? And then plan ahead so students know when it's appropriate to engage in peers, with peers, sorry. So when you have those chat rooms, don't disable it. Set the ground rules. And then after 15 minutes of discussion, you then enable and you go again. The last point, online classes can have limited peer visibility. So students can feel alone when surrounded by peers. So if you note, the cameras are off. There are members in the audience. We don't know who you are. We assume that you're there. But peer visibility, seeing individuals, allows you to connect, that need for belongingness, that need to create a sense of community. You have to create that personal touch within an online environment, given that we can't interact. We're limited in some ways, in the ways in which we can interact. So we have to capitalize on those ways that allow us to create a sense of community. Use multiple avenues to become content creators. What do I mean by that? Don't just have students email the black and white text or colored text. Where's the face in that? Have them create jingles, have them create collages, maybe use photos from their peer groups in their assignments so that you're able to see the peers that you're working with. Experimental problem solving in groups, not too large, because again, if it's too large, you're going to have the same problem with visibility. You know, there are going to be individuals that unfortunately will engage in social loafing, not pulling their weight. And then finally, teach, write, and discuss. And if you notice, discuss comes out a lot and you can't get away from it. Discuss in small groups to allow visibility of all team members so that no student is left behind in this online environment. So I hope that sums up some of the key points of why it's important to engage peers. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jules. A very comprehensive presentation. And from it, we've learned that peer feedback, sense of community, fostering healthy competition among peers, and strength of source are critical motivating factors in engaging online peers in the online learning process. Now we will look to see how self-regulation and autonomy with students can support emergency online learning. Dr. Soraya Daya will present on this, and she is a registered educational psychologist and has worked in the educational arena for the past 10 years. She holds a doctorate in education and child psychology from University College London. She has experience working in local authorities in the UK at a number of primary, secondary, and special education schools, while conducting statutory work for the boroughs, which included working with refugee families. Dr. Daya is in the process of conducting research at the university that will assist and support disadvantaged families. She is currently an executive member of the Barbados Society of Psychology. Dr. Daya?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. What we're going to talk about today is self-regulation and what is autonomy. Understanding self-regulation and autonomy within the emergency online teaching, and ways in which self-regulation and autonomy can be supported within online teaching. I just wanted to draw you guys' attention to this slide because I want you to know that we understand that emergency online teaching is different from typical online teaching, and I think the images just speak for themselves. So what is self-regulation? Self-regulation is an internal processing ability which we all use to monitor, manage, and cope with our emotions and behaviors in a mindful and deliberate way in order to produce a more positive response. Self-regulated learning is a process that assists students in managing their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions in order to successfully navigate their learning experiences. We all know that when our students are stressed, they're not ready to learn. And what about us? I know that when you guys are stressed, it's equally hard to go and work. And I'm sure we can all use one of those cafes at the bottom. Autonomy. Autonomy is considered a fundamental psychological need to function independently with will, choice, and self-determination. School settings then are often a place where children first make connections between other self-regulatory factors such as self-efficacy and self-regulation in learning. As a result, helping students understand how to orchestrate autonomous, self-regulated learning falls primarily on you guys, teachers. Moreover, Students with learning disabilities in traditional settings are then in particular need of teachers who can notice and teach or remind them of a strategy. And this is where maybe the parent role comes in a bit more when we have emergency online teaching or online teaching in a whole. Autonomy is an important construct of motivation in self-regulated online learning environments. When afforded autonomy, students are engaged effectively. Students feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for the work they perform. Students also exhibit emotional connections with instructors who support their autonomy. In online learning environments, instructors are challenged to provide guidance, direction, and expectation through autonomy supportive means to promote student engagement. Because engagement is malleable, there are strategies instructors can use to promote an autonomous learning environment conducive to student engagement. So when motivated, students are likely to invest more time and energy. So without further ado, I'll start filling your cart with some strategies. Goal setting and planning. These are very similar in that they help students self-regulate their learning prior to engaging in learning tasks. Planning occurs in 3 stages: setting a goal for the learning task, establishing strategies for achieving that goal, and determining how much time or resources will be needed to achieve that goal. Providing a rationale. Students who receive a rationale showed more autonomous motivation, use interest-enhancing strategies, and increase behavioral engagement and enhance conceptual learning while completing a relatively interesting activity. Teachers and parents should help students endorse an assignment by providing an explanation and a rationale. We want to know, why is this assignment valuable to me? Why am I doing this? This is probably something you hear quite often. So providing that rationale will help students to value it more. Self-motivation. Self-motivation occurs when learners independently use one or more strategies to keep themselves on track towards a learning goal. It is important to the process of self-regulation because it requires learners to assume control over their learning. Self-motivation occurs in the absence of external rewards or incentives and can therefore be a strong indicator that a learner is becoming more autonomous. By establishing their own learning goals and finding motivation from within to make progress towards these goals, students are more likely to persist through difficult learning tasks and often find the learning process more gratifying. Flexibility. Successful learners are able to implement multiple learning strategies across tasks and adjust those strategies as needed to facilitate their progress towards a desired goal. In the online world, like my colleagues have all mentioned before, we can get creative with the media outlets, online graphics, art, videos, apps, just to engage the students in learning virtually. Providing opportunities for personalization. Students feel autonomous when teachers respect and accept their individual interests and provide flexibility for students to customize course activities so they're closely connected to the students' academic, personal, and professional interests. When students work on personally meaningful projects, they become invested in these assignments and initiatives and motivated by the relevancy to their lives. This might also enhance the teacher-child or teacher-student relationship and the parent-child relationship as well, as they would feel more valued. Seeking help. Self-regulated learners not only seek advice from others, but they also do so with the goal of making themselves more autonomous. Teachers can promote positive help-seeking behaviors by providing students with ongoing progress feedback that they can easily understand and allowing students the opportunity to resubmit assignments after making appropriate changes. Now with online teaching and online learning, we now have that flexibility, like I mentioned before, to assist the learner even more. Self-evaluation. Teachers can promote self-evaluation in online teaching by helping students monitor their learning goals and strategies used, and then make changes to those goals and strategies based on the learning outcomes. So this way, learning is more of a collaborative approach, which will then increase the students' self-confidence and the confidence as a learner. So in conclusion, teachers at the primary and secondary levels can use all of the strategies above, or that my colleagues have mentioned and will continue to mention, to promote self-regulation in emergency online teaching. However, adults should understand that learners develop at various paces, like my colleague Jason and Mia would have alluded to. And strategies that work best for one learner obviously doesn't work best for the next. So hence flexibility. I think that's my key word for you guys to take away. Just be open to being flexible within the online teaching. Also, so as to not stress yourselves out more. Though most teachers would agree that teaching students to be more self-regulative and autonomous in a classroom would be ideal, the online practices do not come without challenges. Developing lessons that prepare students to engage in these practices and provide real support and opportunities for implementation is no small task. Many will find that the major obstacle in helping students become self-regulative is time required to teach students how to use these specific strategies. And we all know that during this pandemic and emergency online teaching, time is now even more of an essence. We are now working in our home environments, and we know that that has its own set of challenges. So by teaching students to be more self-regulative, teachers may experience greater success in promoting academic achievement, motivation, and lifelong learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daya. Thank you for filling our cart by sharing strategies for promoting self-regulation and autonomy within the online context. As you said, goal setting, planning, intrinsic motivation, flexibility, self-evaluation, among other things, should be considered to help us to be more effective when teaching online. And I hope the participants out there, you're writing your questions down, because I have one major question. And this is, how can we advance teaching online? This question is not for you, Dr. Daya, so you can relax. This question is for Professor Donna Marie Maynard, who will answer that question as she speaks about the self-reflective teacher in practice. Professor Donna Marie Maynard is a registered clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at the UE. Her background is in mental health and education, having worked as a counselor in secondary and tertiary institutions. She has over 20 years of experience teaching psychology and counseling and providing clinical supervision for mental health practitioners in training. Professor Maynard's research agenda is comprised of overlapping strands of clinical, counseling, and educational psychology. She has published a number of scholarly articles and book chapters on psychoeducational issues affecting students and teachers. She is a past president of the Barbados Association of Psychologists. In 2020, Professor Maynard was appointed as a member of the UE COVID-19 Task Force. So Professor Maynard, yes, we would like you to answer that question. How do we advance online teaching?
Thank you, Ramona. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm hoping that after my presentation, I'll be able to help you to get some clarity on that question. So let's move along. I should really say that the experience of being thrown into providing emergency online teaching has been extremely taxing on our cognitive and emotional resources. The fear and anxiety resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic can undermine our cognitive capacity and short circuit the learning process. And remember, this is not just for us as teachers, but also for our students, okay? When you add to this the amazing balancing act of concurrently teaching the nation's children online and managing our own households within the same space, now amidst all of this, I am here to talk to you about the importance of self-reflection and reflective practices as a means to improve your craft. Now, for some of us, this hasty transition to online teaching shifted our focus from student engagement and fostering the joy of learning to content delivery. Many have experienced a sense of feeling pressured, inadequate, fearful, and challenged with this move to online teaching. We now have to work on leaving old ways of being and practicing and embrace new ways of teaching online. There are many changes ahead. The technology is constantly being updated and upgraded, and expectations of teachers are changing rapidly. Teaching online is a markedly different learning environment to the classroom, and we have to acknowledge that. Using a gardening analogy, in the same way that we prune plants to allow room for new growth, I want you as teachers to ask yourselves, what do I need to let go of in order to develop my teaching in the online world? I'm going to share a quote here from psychologist Carl Rogers. He says, "The only man who is educated is the man who has learned how to adapt and change. The man who has realized that no knowledge is secure, that only the process of seeking knowledge gives a basis for security." And sticking with Rogers a little longer, because he's actually one of the premier psychologists who introduced the term reflection, or the concept of reflection. And reflection for Rogers was a way that the therapist holds up a mirror of the client's current experiencing, okay, by vocally mirroring it and helping the client to gain clarity, to reflect on their own behaviors, their own thought processes, and the part that they play in their own reality. For in therapy, the feelings and personal meanings of the client appear sharper when they're reflected, therefore helping to heighten the individual's self-awareness. And Rogers presented a view that individuals held the most knowledge about themselves. In philosophy, they refer to this as phenomenology. And therefore, they possess the ability to engage in self-reflection and learn from that process. Hence, self-reflection is a way that the individual can engage in self-examination and the reflective process for themselves, and requires that you be honest with yourself, okay? So you have to be self-aware. Let me just tell you a little bit about self-awareness theory, which was developed by Duval and Wickland in the 70s. And it states that when we focus our attention on ourselves, we evaluate and compare our current behavior to our internal standards and values. And this elicits a state of objective self-awareness. The more self-focused the person is, the more self-aware the person becomes. Okay, so self-reflection also requires self-efficacy. And that really is that you are able to recognize your capabilities to succeed and your areas of weakness. Psychologist Albert Bandura, who you would have heard mentioned earlier, he defines self-efficacy as one's belief in one's ability to succeed or accomplish a task. Our sense of self-efficacy can play a major role in how we approach goals, tasks, and challenges. Unless we believe that we can produce desired effects by our actions, we have little incentive to undertake activities or to persevere in the face of difficulties. All that we do is embedded in the core belief that we have the power to affect changes by our actions. This core belief operates through its impact on our cognitive, motivational, affective, and decisional processes. Finally, self-reflection requires you to actively take responsibility for your behaviors. That is self-regulation. This is our ability to control our actions and impulses. People who can do this are more likely to achieve their goals. They also tend to meet specified standards of behavior. Baumeister and colleagues in 2007 described 4 components of self-regulation: standards of desirable behavior, motivation to meet standards, monitoring of situations and thoughts that precede breaking standards, and willpower, the internal strength to control urges. So how do we go about engaging in this self-reflection? I think that the first thing you have to do really is start by finding yourself some what I call mental health time, but more commonly is referred to as me time. Okay, so find yourself some me time each day. Find a quiet place, have a chat with yourself. Use breathing exercises. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. This allows your heart rate to slow down and allows you to have a clearer mind. I want you to laugh, cry, scream, allow yourself to freely feel whatever emotions you're experiencing in the moment and focus on what you have just experienced, okay? Figure out what was good and what needs more work or tweaking. After figuring out what needs to be done, now go ahead and do it, okay? It's very important to document your journey as you go through this reflective process. Record all your thoughts, experiences, and challenges as you progress. Make a choice to be positive because reflection plays an important role in our development and it is linked with our overall socio-emotional well-being. From the perspective of education, the theories of Dewey and Sean, and we have Gibbs' reflective cycle, have guided our understanding of the reflective teacher. So moving from self-reflection now onto the reflective teacher and reflective practices. Posing reflection as being a process by which the teacher assesses the effectiveness and adequacy of their professional knowledge and practice for the purpose of improving their teaching and students' learning experience. So reflection within the context of teaching is the deliberate, purposeful, metacognitive thinking and or action that we as teachers use to improve our professional practice. And this refers to the process in which practitioners reflect and learn from their own teaching experience in order to develop their pedagogic skills. Reflective practice is focused thinking that supports self-knowledge and understanding. It is challenging and involves observations, analyzing data, reflecting this onto your own teaching experience, and making decisions about future classes. I'm not seeing my cursor, sorry. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, why do we need to engage in reflection? The critically reflective teacher is best placed to develop their own teaching in order to better the learning experiences of their students. As Rogers would have indicated, we know ourselves best. We know what we are thinking in the moment, what we're experiencing in the moment. We know what we're processing. We know what motivates us to prepare our lesson plan in a particular way. We know ourselves best. And being able to reflect on what we've been through and how we're presenting our lessons is a very important part of this puzzle. Teaching online is new to most of us. Demanding situations will arise. Often there are no right or wrong answers, nor procedures to follow. We are expected to use our professional judgment, so there's often no time or opportunity to consult with more experienced colleagues, okay? Collecting and analyzing data for effective self-reflection is critical. You as a teacher need to stop and ask yourself, have you noticed limited engagement in your online synchronous classes? How about those students who are typically very talkative and interact and engaged in your face-to-face classes? Do they seem to be much quieter now that you're in the online platform? So using data from students' level of engagement in online classes, polling students and using brief online surveys, assessing their work, reflecting on your own experience of being a student in maybe a professional development online class, using recordings of your classes and staying abreast of recent developments in online pedagogical research are some of the ways in which you can collect relevant data. Research has found that when teachers use data to reflect on what worked, what did not work, and what types of changes they might make to be more successful, the likelihood of knowing how to improve increases dramatically. Reflection involves doing. I'm going to go back to my garden analogy that I referred to earlier. Pruning influences the direction in which a plant grows. Each time you make a cut, you stop growth in one direction and encourage it in another. In a similar way, reflective practice utilizes a cycle of reflection, action, reflection, okay? And if you're familiar with Gibbs' model, you know that there's a little more involved in that, but it's this cyclic relationship that you have. It's a continuous process of self-evaluation. It is a considered approach that promotes self-awareness and critical evaluation skills. Reflective practice might occur individually as a form of introspection or as part of a reflective conversation, maybe with your mentors and peers within the workplace, sorry. The aim is to continually improve your practice as part of the process of lifelong learning. So again, stop and ask yourself, what do I want to change about my practice? What will effectively impact student learning online? How can I develop a plan of action to address my online teaching? And how will I know that I've accomplished my objective? So you should be able to articulate what sources of evidence are informing your decisions when writing your goal. Reflection is a skill that, like a muscle, needs a good workout to stay strong and flexible. Now, there are many ways in which you can reflect on your online teaching. You can start by including reflection in your lesson plan. Use class exit slips so you can post questions at the end of the class or towards the end of the class, and you can have students respond to you privately in the chat feature. You can invite your colleagues to join the class as an observer. You can record your online teaching and review, or you can do 1-minute reflections at the end of the class, noting what went well and what didn't. You can also use a teacher survey or a teacher reflection checklist. So there are many ways in which you can engage in this reflection of your online practice. Unfortunately, reflection can easily be overlooked when time is short and you're working under the emergency circumstances which we have been practicing under for the past few months, which is why any digital tools that can make it easier are of great use for learning and professional development. Now, I'm sure all of you that have been through Teachers College know the importance of journaling, keeping that reflective journal. Instead of recording your reflections and plans on paper, you can use Microsoft Word or Google Docs to create files where you can write your reflections and images and add images and links. There are also a number of digital note-making platforms such as Evernote, OneNote, and Google Keep, which go beyond journaling and offer possibilities for handling notes, drawing information from research articles on Google Scholar and other journal databases. Now, with these tools, you can add audio, images, and click websites. And as they sync across all of your devices, your virtual notebook is actually always accessible to you. You can even use your smartphone to quickly make a short recording or type up notes. For those of you who are a little more adventurous, you may want to engage in reflective blogging or podcasting using a platform like WordPress or Blogger, which you can post publicly, sharing with the world teaching community, or privately with a select audience of teachers from your school maybe, or just for yourself. It's a good way to keep that record of your progress, because through the process of reflection, you can see your growth and development as an online teacher. Why am I not seeing my cursor? Okay, right. Finally, in conclusion, research indicates that our ability to reflect on what, how, and why we do things, and readily adapting and developing our behaviors, as well as consistently practicing the skills necessary for reflection, we often become more motivated, we become less anxious, we perform better, and plan more effectively for the future. Practicing self-reflection is at the core of our reflective practices. Okay, so practicing self-reflection and then engaging in active reflection on your teaching and using what you learn to inform your future practice will enable continuous improvement in your online teaching as you become that online self-reflective teacher. Thank you very much for your time. I will hand you back to Ramona. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maynard, and thank you for answering my question and for giving us practical ways that we can become self-reflective teachers in practice, even in the online environment. I particularly like the analogy of pruning, the fact that we need to reflect, act, and reflect again in that kind of cyclical way. This brings us to the end of the presentations, and I want to thank all of the speakers for sharing this afternoon. But now it is time for questions, and I'm sure that many of you have questions. So let me see. We have a question from Joanne Prosper Chase. She says, in relation to a child in the pre-operational stage, if he or she is advanced, how do you challenge them? I believe that this question is for Grace.
Yes, please.
In relation to a child in the pre-operational stage, if he or she is advanced, how do you challenge them?
Yeah, we can we can give some, we can arrange for the children that are high achievers in the class to go ahead and, you know, experience some new learning. New topics can be introduced, you know, to them, and, you know, encourage them to be with some other students, you know, so that they work together. They try and scaffold them, just as Vygotsky suggested, that, you know, the more knowledgeable other can be the peers, can be the teachers, can be the parents. So at this time, it will be the child who is high up there, who will also be trying to, you know, bring up the other, you know, children who are not just really coming up. And this is very, very effective, because the children are always, you know, they are always encouraged to learn from one another. They want to, you know, when they see their peers, you know, doing something, they feel that, yeah, this is very good, and they also want to do it. So that's my contribution.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question here from an anonymous attendee. The person doesn't want to say their name. The question, it says, my question would be, how can you be effective enough in the online teaching? How do you really know if the students are taking in the work? And this question is for any of the panelists. Any takers?
Okay, if I could jump in. Right, so how do you know the students are taking in the work? And fundamentally, with regard to online education, it doesn't mean because you're online that principles associated with face-to-face education go out the window. The process of formative assessment, for example, checking in with students to find out how they're learning as you go along, having summative assessment strategies at the end. So these things don't go out the window when you go transition online. These things remain. So that is one of the major strategies that you could use in terms of using formative assessment. What I like to do too is to speak to students individually. If I realize that a student may not be as active in the online learning environment, I will ask to meet with the student to find out if there's anything that they need to get them a bit more engaged and to find out where they're at with their learning. So it's not really rocket science when it comes to that. The whole process of formative assessment and summative assessment and engaging with your student outside of the classroom or outside of the lesson. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jason. We have another question from Ronaldo Jordan. He says, firstly, re-recording of classes. How do you view the importance of the right of students and teachers to privacy? And how does one balance that with the ease of access to resources? Do you think that knowing one is being recorded would decrease risk-taking by both students and teachers?
Ooh, can I try that?
Go for it, Donna, no problem.
As I say, it's a triple question, so I'll take the first piece and you can have the rest. Okay, first of all, I mean, I am a big supporter of recording classes, but you're quite right, you do have to respect the students' privacy. Best practice would be that you receive signed consent from their parents to be able to record the lessons. Other options are that when you are actually using the material, if you're using it for your private use, and it's not a problem, but if you're using it for public use, let's say you're using it in professional development, the faces of the children should really be blurred out. We should protect the privacy of the children. There's a lot of software out there that you can use to blur out the children's faces or to distort them in some way. But coming from a strong counseling background, it's been best practice always in counseling. In fact, Carl Rogers was one of the first psychologists to actually start video recording counseling sessions and group counseling sessions, so you could actually see the aha moments in counseling taking place live and direct. So I do respect that there are issues, especially within a small society like Barbados, when it comes to the recording of classes. But I think it's something that can be very useful, especially in terms of reflective practice and being able to look back at how the lesson went and how the students responded to it.
Okay.
Over to you now, Dr.
Can
Julie.
I just add something onto that as well? I think what a question that came out of that I was understanding was maybe the recording of, I can't remember if it was Jason that said it, they pre-recording the class so that the student can go back and go at their own pace. So not necessarily recording the whole, like how we might be recording this whole Zoom call, but maybe a pre-recording of the teacher teaching a class or giving the lesson on whatever subject they're doing or topic they're doing, and then giving it to the student so that the student can then watch it either as a pre-learning tool before the class starts, or just go, if the teacher decides, okay, well, you can go off with this video and do it at your own pace, because like we all said, every child learns differently and at their own pace. So that student can then rewind, fast forward, and watch the video in that sense.
Yes, I just want to add on, I think Donna and Soraya pretty much covered all the points, but I think there was an aspect to that question whereby, I can't remember everything, but the essence of it was.
Thank you. We have a question.
Hello?
Go ahead, Maya.
Sorry about that. I was going to mention that from my research, I found that when you're in an online space, sorry, let me go back to the question and answer. I understood that there was an element whereby if you're recording the sessions, it might hinder participation, might hinder individuals, engaging. But what research has found, in my research especially, is that there is an online disinhibition effect. You might think that recording might prevent individual sharing, but because there are many ways with which you can communicate in a session, if you notice, they're talking about, they would have mentioned the face being recorded or the voice, but we also have comments. We also can sign in as anonymous. So depending on how you structure that online session, depending on the topic of interest, if it's a sensitive issue, you can set the parameters, which will indeed make individuals feel comfortable. And you also have to look at the demographic as well. I think what you mentioned, Dawn, about parental consent is very important. But in my experience with individuals above 18, and all of the concepts that we would have touched on still apply to the university student as well. And I have found that the recordings did help them, and I've found that the individuals participate. Sometimes I forget that the recording is on because I feel so comfortable, so that's it from me.
Okay, thank you for sharing. We have a question from Junie Lynch. She says, in light of the fact that students with exceptionalities often have difficulties with self-regulation, what can the teacher do to give these students a more positive online experience?
So that's a very tough question. But what can we do to give these students a more positive online experience? I think it would have to start with doing something from the very beginning. So maybe, I know now school is going to soon come to a close, but maybe for the next term and going onwards, we can look at creating those bonds with a student. So getting to know the student, maybe getting to find out what stresses them, how they cope with certain things when under pressure and that sort of thing, so that then we can give them the tools to do that. And we can do something similar to what Donna was saying with the self-reflective practice can also be used for students, where we can use breathing techniques. We can maybe tell the student, go outside, listen to music for 5 minutes, if that's gonna bring their emotions down and help them self-regulate. Maybe they need a timeout card or something where they can say, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling frustrated, or whatever the emotion is, and giving them the opportunity to have a safe space. So if it might be a younger child, it might be something where there's a little chair set up with a teddy bear in the corner. Or if it's an older child, they might just need to go outside for a quick walk and come back, or listen to some music. And it's just creating that safe space so that they can self-regulate and then return back to the classroom. I don't know if I answered that, but.
Okay, thank you.
But
we have another
in the classroom. So now with online, it might be the same thing with an online setting where the students can do the same exact thing, it's just in the online purposes where they can maybe private message the teacher and say, you know, I'm feeling frustrated, or we all know at home, the home environment could be quite chaotic. So maybe the student might just, you know, not be feeling particularly motivated or wanting to learn in that particular moment. So they might just be able to message the student, which might actually be a really good thing rather than in class, because that's more private and the student wouldn't feel like they have to go up in front of a whole class of their friends to do something. So it might actually be a better thing online.
Okay, thank you. Michael Toppin has a question. He says, there was great emphasis on the role of the parent in the success of online learning. What can we as teachers do where the parent is unable to support the learning process?
So if, go on,
Daya.
go for it.
No, I think I'll put my mic back on mute. You go with it. Thank you.
Yes, Soraya, you go ahead.
I'm just thinking, if the parent is not available, let's say they're working or whatever the circumstance is there another family member around? Is there maybe then going into Mia's presentation, which I'm not sure if that's what you were about to say, use those peers, you know, let the peers help. And I guess the teacher would have to then understand the dynamic between the peers within the classroom and the personalities within the classroom, then to say, you know, this particular student does not have mom around, does not have dad around, auntie, uncle, whoever. Would you be open to checking in on that student for me? And I guess that gives the student that's checking in that sense of responsibility and feeling valued as well. I'm not sure, Mia, you go ahead.
Yeah, I want to echo some of these points that you made in terms of you can focus on other agents of socialization, parents, you can tap into peers, you can even tap into other caregivers, but you have to answer that question, you'll need more information. What developmental group are you dealing with? Because you have to be careful too. I would have done some research recently with Professor Maynard and some other colleagues from Jamaica, and I actually found that the more parental monitoring and the more engaged parents are in students learning, and we were looking at individuals now transitioning into secondary school around the common entrance period. And we actually found that when parents engage too much in that environment, it can create feelings of anxiety and create feelings of sadness, you know, nervousness. So you have to be careful. You have to know when it's appropriate and when it isn't. It is a hard question. I don't think we can answer it in a one-off statement. Parents are important, but depending on the demographic that you're dealing with, if you want to engender some degree of autonomy, be able to teach students the ability to regulate, we are training them to become young people in our society. So you can't have the parents in the environment throughout, you know. So those are some things that I wanted to add to what Daya mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Samuel Sawyer.
Oh, sorry, Maynard, you were raising. Oh, I'm not the moderator. Apologies.
Sorry if you have to move on. No, I was just going to add a very, very small point in terms of when we talk about parental support, because I've had some questions from teachers over the past few weeks asking about, you know, parents doing the child's work and that type of thing. So there's parental support, there's parental over support, there's parental helicoptering. Really what we need within this environment at the moment is for the parent to provide a level of structure for the child. Okay, so that the child knows that between this time and that time, I'm going to sit down with the computer, with the iPad or whatever it is, and I have to engage with some schoolwork, whether it's a synchronous or asynchronous interaction. So I think that a parent that's able to ensure that the necessary structure is in place for the child to be able to sit down comfortably and approach their work is the most important thing, especially under the current circumstances. So yes, we do want supportive parents, but we don't want parents who are doing the work for the children. We don't want parents who are directing the children, saying, we didn't learn it like this, try this way. We still want the teachers to have or to be able to extend a degree of classroom management, even though it's via the online platform. So yes, so supportive teachers, but not teachers, supportive parents, but not over supportive parents. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. I'll accept one last question, and this question is from Samuel Sawyer. He says, thanks everyone for a well-articulated focus, content, and appropriate visuals and videos. Can anyone give specific explanations and or examples of how to maximize physical movement in online learning? Gallery walk was identified but not explained. I think this is at Grace. Yes, so you.
We can, the gallery work can be done in form of, you know, getting into the classroom, you know, the breakout rooms, you know, because the participants can actually engage in the activity there. They will be talking, you know, they will be sharing their ideas, you know. It's not necessary for them to really sit as we are sitting down now, though they are not physically together, but they can actually be like, oh, looking at one another doing some things, you know, in the same, you know, in that break. And as soon as they have their, you know, ideas, you know, after their brainstorming, they can always come back to the main room and have the ideas shared with, you know, other groups. Normally, they will be engaged in group work, you know, and this is very, very important for students to learn. And as they do this, they also, you know, help one another to, you know, gain more knowledge about the topic being done. So gallery work, although we know that physically, when we have the face-to-face teaching, we will see that students will move in the classroom, you know, physically, you know, doing some things, going to different stations and having some things done. But even now online, we can practice it. It can be practiced because you have yourself together, you talking, you know, on the computer, and you are doing the work. So it's very, very practicable.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We know that the online teaching experience of today is very new for many of us, and we hope that this webinar with its psychological insights for the future has met your needs. So thanks again for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.